Hello and welcome to the Tabletop Team Podcast. I am your host, Joe, and with me this week is my fabulous co-host.
Don Julian coming at you pre-recorded 6 hours early, in fact. Here I am, not in Ohio today, so this will be a good one. This will be the best one, or this will be just a regular one.
You'll notice quite quickly that our buddy and co-host Mike is not here. That is because due to scheduling issues, we are all over the place. It is 2 a.m. for me, and
It's
I'm on
8
the
a.m.
Eastern Standard Time.
And I'm in, I don't know what time zone I'm in right now, but it is 8 a.m.-ish.
So we have found a way for the two of us to record, and we figured we'll just give it a shot. It probably won't be as good without Mike, but
We are going to dub him in. He will be sprinkled in throughout the podcast. You will know he's here.
It'll feel like he never left.
Let's pause for a moment. We're going to add some audio clips. That's probably enough.
Yeah, that's good enough.
It's just going to be Cobalt.
Yeah. The sound of like Cobalt shaking in the background.
Yeah.
So this week we are going to be talking about expansions. Webster's Dictionary defines... No, I'm joking about that.
It's a graduation speech of
best man or maid of honor speech.
Right.
So yeah, expansions, things where it doesn't change the base game. It's not a new game. It is just an addition to the game. I guess it could change it a little bit, but usually it's just an additional rules, pieces, board sizes, sometimes a different board in general, just to mix things up. So expansions I'm really familiar with are, of course, our good old tradition Zombicide. They are known for expansions. Not only did first edition have, I think, like 5 or 6 like full expansions come out, where they added like a mall and a prison and just like new towns and stuff. When they came out with Black Plague, they eventually came out with Green Horde, which, while is standalone, also works with Black Plague, giving you not only more monsters and characters to try out, which Jason and I, who's been on this show before, when we play Zombicide Black Plague through our campaign, we have all these different characters. We have like 50, 60 different characters we can choose from. And because we have so many, we implemented the rule of permadeath. So as characters die in the session, we can't use them again. It's been so long, I don't remember which characters have died, except for like a couple of the really big ones that we love. But
so it's like Game of Thrones board game edition.
Yeah, kind of.
By the way, I've never seen Game of Thrones, so I hope that lands.
I haven't either. I just know everyone dies.
Right. So, okay, one thing that I think is really interesting about Zombicide is we've talked about it quite a bit on the podcast, and we've also set up some game nights where we would play it, but we haven't ever played it, or we haven't played it yet. And every time you're like, we're playing this version of Zombicide with this expansion. So you're always telling me we're not playing base game, we're playing with the expansion. So that tells me that this expansion is either one, incredible, or two, the base game maybe is instantly enhanced a lot more without the expansion. Is that true?
So I've only played the fantasy setting, which is Black Plague and Green Horde. Original Zombicide is set in modern times. Then they came out with Black Plague and Green Horde. Not together, but separate campaigns. This is by a company called Cool Mini or Not as well. They do a whole lot of board games, and everything they do is through Kickstarter. So they have the first edition of Zombicide, which has recently, they did a Kickstarter to remake it in second edition. They have the fantasy version. Then they did a space version, which I think was Zombicide Invaders. And then they also recently did a Kickstarter for what is not out yet, but I backed, was the Dead West. It's a Wild West setting.
I was just about to say Cowboys. I was joking with it though. That's awesome.
And it's a bit of a weird tactic, but they're definitely like, hey, look, here is our board game, and then to get to our stretch goals, because usually what a Kickstarter, if you don't know Kickstarter, why are you listening to this podcast? How did you find this?
This is a Kickstarter.
Kickstarter is, you go on, you say, hey, look, here's my idea. I want to make a movie. I want to make a game. I want to make a figure, cards, whatever, anything, basically. Startup companies, yada, yada. And then people can pledge money to you. Usually when they give you money, you are promising to return an item. Like it's kind of like pre-ordering, pre-purchasing, so they get that initial funds to help kickstart their company or their item. Now, Zombicide has always done this where they say, here's the base game, and then to get to the stretch goals, because the idea of stretch goals is we are making enough money where we can pay to get more stuff for you guys for and we're still, making a profit.
Right.
And Zombicide it always goes, hey, look, here is our product. And then in order to get to the stretch goals, here are expansions you can add, new characters, new settings, yada, yada. The Wild West one comes with a steampunk one, which really got me excited because I love steampunk shit.
Oh yeah.
And and while the aesthetic is out there, there's really not that much of that in like nerd culture. I mean, I'm sure you can find an tabletop RPG like it, but like in video games, it's like the only real steampunk thing I know of is Dishonored, the Dishonored series, and I'm sure there's board games and stuff, but it's not. It's a very popular idea that I don't see implemented a lot.
Yeah, I think steampunk. I can't think of anything that comes to mind that it like pops out as like, hey, this is steampunk. Like, look at this. Other than like in video game culture, but yeah, not so much on tabletop.
And I mean, like, I'm sure I could Google right now steampunk board game or something, and we'll find a dozen of them. But like I said,
I
it's
know,
not like.
right?
But at the same time, it's like this is something that I haven't heard of. And while I keep bringing up Zombicide, the reason I keep doing that is because it's obviously a popular company. I've said I think they've quite literally done a dozen of these games in this Zombicide series. You don't do that many without a modicum of success and popularity.
Right.
And that's not the only game they do. They do a bunch of other games. I haven't personally backed most of them. I think the only one I backed recently is they did like a triple board game bundle where it was Looney Tunes, Teen Titans Go, and Scooby Doo. I backed specifically just for the Scooby Doo one because I love Scooby Doo.
I know that you like mysteries way more. I'm sure. No, the mystery machine.
I mean, I grew up with that crap, man. I mean,
Yeah.
I probably my dad hated the Space Ghost episode because I watched it all the time, and he does that stupid laugh, and like it was like the most repeated episode all the time. I'm not going to do the laugh because it's 2 a.m. and I have neighbors in my apartment. So,
So, one thing just to get off on a tangent, dude, Scooby Doo. Did you ever watch Pup Named Scooby Doo?
oh yes, love that as well.
Yeah, so I have a memory of me with a notepad trying to figure out who the freaking character was, like as if I was there like on a mystery, like, oh, I'm like eliminating suspects.
Red herring.
Yeah, right. And so yeah, that's how it always was. It's so funny. It's red. That was such a good little tidbit they always put in there.
Yeah,
I would like to play Zombicide sometime because just with all the expansions that are available, I know that can get overwhelming. How many of those expansions are interchangeable, or can you just play the one at a time?
hypothetically you can mix them all together. It's a very similar rule set. No, I can't speak for Invader or the Wild West one, very specifically the Wild West one, because it seems like they're kind of they're trying some new things out with that. I'll let you know as soon as I get my hands on my copy.
Pause the podcast. We'll wait.
As for the Invaders edition, I wasn't interested. I mean, it looked cool. They had like a really giant, like blobby abomination. Just wasn't my cup of tea. I really like the fantasy, and the modern day is okay. But when they came out with the released edition, I wanted to, but financially, it just wasn't right for me. I probably shouldn't have backed the stuff I have backed, but I have an addiction, so the first step to dealing with it is admitting it and then just forgetting you admitted it and keep feeding that addiction. But no, specifically, they say things, I believe, like when I was getting Black Plague, this was before Green Horde came out. I bought Black Plague from like Walmart or something. And the rules, at least online, by like Cool Mini or not themselves, said something like you can bring cards over from the other system. For example, because they have a Ash Williams character called Troy, like If you're playing with the Troy figure, why not bring the shotgun and the chainsaw card over?
Right.
And I'm sure you could get real creative depending on like the rules and stuff. It's just I think the biggest thing, like all the characters change, so I don't know exactly how items and stuff work on the modern one compared to the fantasy, compared to the invaders, compared to the Wild West. I mean, it's so much.
I do find that that probably is one of the most complex aspects of when game designers are bringing expansions is going, hey, does this mechanic that I'm adding break any of the other aspects of the game? And I wonder how they mitigate those concerns.
Probably just
Trial.
playtesting is
Yeah.
trial and error playtesting. I'm sure like here's the thing too is like obviously I think the base game they come out with is supposed to be balanced, and then when they come out with the extra stuff, like for example, when Green Horde was coming out, they introduced legendary heroes. So every character starts with a blue skill. It's like their default ability. For example, my favorite character to play is Sir Schwartz, who is the Black Knight from Monty Python, has an
Oh.
ability called he has an ability called Is That All You Got? And every time he gets hit or you take damage, you can choose to discard an item from your inventory and not take the damage.
Oh wow. Oh, and that works really well with this.
Yeah. I mean, another side tangent, but same vein is I once had a build for him where he had the best armor that you can get. Like I drew the best armor card. I had, I think, a shield which lets you re-roll attacks. For armor, it means you can't get hit on if the zombies roll, they have to roll like a 4. No, I think they have to roll like 8. They have to roll a 6 to hit me or something like that on a
Yeah.
d6. And then I have a shield which allows me to make attacks re-roll, and then I had that ability, so it was I got hit when I wanted to get hit,
Pretty much,
which
yeah.
was really funny because he has another ability later on where like when he gets hit he can do like another action or something for free. So there was actually one point where I did get hit on purpose and took damage. That was a whole other story. I can't really remember. I just remember it was really satisfying when I pulled it off. But yeah, so these legendary characters have 2 blue skills. So they have that, and then say there's like a skill called slippery, and it means you can move through zombies without losing movement speed, because like you have to add an extra movement action for every zombie that's on a tile. I know too
Man,
much
that game
rules for my
sounds
own good.
yeah. I love it though because that game sounds so complex, but I feel like if we were playing it, you'd be able to kind of explain each part to it. Because there's a game that I got gifted from my sister-in-law a couple years back called El Grande, or Grande is how I've heard it pronounced as well. And it's kind of like I have no idea how to play this game, but what she did was she got me. It came in this huge box, and I'm talking like suitcase size box. And one night, we were hanging out with some friends and I started opening up. I was like, we're going to play this game. And it came with every expansion. There's like 5 expansions. And I opened up all of these expansions and had no idea what did what for what thing. And then we had to figure out where all the expansions went and put them in bags. And we haven't opened up that game since. Because we had no idea
Sounds
how any of it worked. It was the worst. I do eventually want to play it, and I think we should play it on the podcast. Well, maybe not on it, but for it, just because
yeah.
it seems so complex.
Yeah, and I mean, Zombicide is complex to some extent, like every game. And, I still have to rules check. I don't know what every single ability does. And sometimes we're like, oh, does this go first? Does this go first? Whatever. Heck, if you don't have one person, know how the game works, like everybody else can play pretty easily. It's just like,
Right.
because like it is very good at spelling things out. Like it'll say on your card, like, you need to roll this number if you want to hit. And if you hit, you do this amount of damage. And luckily, most things are like, it's 1, 2, or 3 damage. Like, it's not like extreme numbers. The other thing is, you have to do that amount of damage to kill it. So, for example, regular zombies only need 1 damage, but there are fatties and they need 2 damage. You can't do 1 damage and kill it. You have to do the 2 damage in 1 hit, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
yeah.
So like once you figure that out, it's like it's pretty, it flows once you know how it works. Welcome to the unofficial Zombicide fan podcast this week.
Coming at you live. No, no, I do like that we talk about Zombicide because I wonder how much, because I had never heard of the game before you. But now every time we talk about it, I'm like, okay, like I'll know the rules by the time we start playing.
No, you won't.
No, I do find it interesting though, when you set up a base game and you're like, let's add an expansion. Okay, so what does it do? And everyone's constantly fighting over the rules. We did this recently when we played Catan. I'd never played the Seafarers game, and I constantly was like, hey, what does this do? Like, where do I go with this? How can I get to the boats? Or how does this work? But that's another one. Catan has, a bunch of expansions. One expansion I think is really interesting about that is the 5 and 6 player expansion. So it's pretty much the same game, just making it like, hey, you got a couple more friends? Let's all play together. I have not played it that way, but that kind of feels like chaos to me.
Yeah, Catan is one of those interesting ones because it's definitely a game where it's like they nailed the formula on the first try. Well, I don't know the whole company story, but they nailed the formula on that game, and they're like, how do we make more money?
Right.
And I think my least favorite thing about Catan is the 5 and 6 player expansion,
No
only
kidding.
because the price. Only because of the
Oh,
price tag.
it's the same
Because
freaking price. It's bull crap.
yeah, you'd think just for some extra pieces, like I don't even think there's I don't think there's any rules. It's just more colored pieces so you can play with more people. It's the same price as the base board game. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, that's not fair. Might as well buy 2 board games and then just like take like a marker to those
Yeah,
pieces.
and have
All
more
right,
tokens.
that's what I am gonna do actually. Now it's 8 player.
Make a double size map.
Right, right. Because I don't know if they add any additional like things to it. I really do think it's just more board pieces, different colors, tokens. I don't think that there's any additional anything that comes with it.
And I mean, the box is like I'm showing you the camera, like you
Oh
know
yeah,
what it is, but it's
yeah.
perfect for audio. But like the thing is, all the expansions, with the exception of the 5 or 6 player, is the same size as the base game, and then the 5 or 6 player is like this teeny tiny little box, and
It's
you're like,
similar
and
to the Cards Against Humanity box. It's very small.
yeah, and again, just price wise, if I look at the regular game of Catan, and it's like $50 or whatever the fuck it is, it's expensive.
Yeah.
And then you look at Seafarers and you're like, okay, it's the same price, but the box is the same size. And at least from my experience, I know how much of it adds. It really diversifies the game and really would add to that replay value. You look at the 5 or 6 player box, you're like, that thing is smaller and the same price. What am I getting out of this? I don't have this many friends. My friends aren't worth this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because not only that, with the Seafarers expansion, you can still play with just like 3 people, maybe 4 people if you have a fourth person. But instantly, you're saying, not only do I have the money to buy something that I'll only use when I have 5 or 6 people. Well, when are you getting 5 or 6 people over to do this, man? Like, maybe I don't set up board game nights as efficiently as some of these people. But is there other expansions for Catan?
Yeah, there's Caravan, and
Oh yeah.
there's the Knights and Bandits or whatever. There's a bunch. I just know Seafarers because that's the one that was basically introduced the first time I played Catan, and I do actually really enjoy the Seafarers. It's really fun just to have this bit. It really makes it feel more realistic, almost like in that if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially because we were playing with a bucket of water. If you like went across this thing, we sprinkle you. No,
Yeah,
uh, no. What I
I
thought
drove all
about
the way to
this,
Ohio and sprayed you with a spritz bottle.
yeah, you're crossing the sea. No, what I thought was interesting about that, because when we played with that guy and Rothio, one thing that was interesting was, okay, so now who's capturing these islands? And if you start capturing them right away, those are yours. You're locked in. And then there was just not really a chance for me or Rothio to kind of go over there and start collecting some of those resources. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that like the island had a special resource.
Yes, there was a gold resource that we had, which was specifically if your number got rolled for that, you could pick anything you wanted.
Right. So you get that bonus for having that. And that's like such a cool bonus. Anytime you can get extra anything in the game. I guess in Catan, you don't really want to have too many extra cards just in case someone rolls a 7. But being able to regularly get that and then actually use those on your turn, it's so helpful, you know? especially if you can get any card you want.
Yeah, another game that we played. I feel like we're kind of broken records on our podcast. We only have played so many games, but like we're all adults with lives. What? Shut
Yeah,
up.
man. This is a
Is
very narrow
Carcassonne?
podcast. Oh yeah, Carcassonne. I love this game. So I was introduced to Carcassonne with an expansion, and now when I play it without the expansion, I think it's not as much fun. And so Carcassonne has an expansion Carcassonne is just like a tile placing game. You kind of end up with a square, but without the first expansion with the river, which kind of makes the game more linear, everyone just has all these pockets of areas that they work on, and really no one interacts with each other. So what the river does is makes you form a line, and then throughout this line you start adding your tiles, which kind of makes everyone's pieces start interchanging, and you're constantly forced to be battling with each other. And I think that adds a really great layer to the complexity of the game. I think there was another expansion we played with you that I wasn't familiar with until then. I think, what was
I
it? It
think it was
had
the
the
Priest expansion.
yeah, they had
Like,
cathedrals, and the cities were more, because those were like
yeah.
gambling.
Oh yeah, yeah. There was like the cities and cathedrals expansion as well. We had Tabletop Simulator. Everybody, it's really worth it.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun, especially if you're like us with friends all across the globe, if you will, or the plane. I don't know. I don't want to discriminate against flat earthers or anything.
No, we discriminate against flat earthers. Get out of here. If you listen to us, get the fuck out.
Jump off. So that yeah, tabletop simulator is pretty awesome for that stuff. But yeah, so with the other expansion we played, and I really wish I knew what the name of it was off the top of my head, but you would almost gamble, like you'd place this piece and you're like, I'm going to complete this set of cities, and if you don't, you get no points. Where typically,
I think it's called castles and cathedrals. I think it's that
yeah,
simple.
yeah. I think so too. Because it makes so much sense.
If
Here's an
not, Future Joe will edit it in. Hey everyone, Future Joe here. Not only did we get the name wrong, it's called Inns and Cathedrals expansion. It turns out Carcassonne actually has 11 different expansions that we didn't know about. So we're gonna have to do a little dive into that and come back to that in the future. Look forward to that.
Yeah, there. I love when that happens, where it's like, okay, here's Future Joe. We're talking like this is this new thing, and I'm like, oh, nice. Really adds. Hey, so here's a question I have for you. If it is, or is it, if it's not an expansion, Dos for Uno. I've not played it. Is it you added in, or what the heck?
I think it's supposed to be its own separate thing. I've never
Oh,
played it though either,
all right.
so
Cut that from the podcast. This is bull crap. I don't even know why I brought it up.
I mean, this is just kind of a jokey one, but here's the truest expansion is when back in the days when there was a deck of playing cards, and you added a second deck of playing cards.
Oh my god, dude. That was some of the wildest stuff ever, especially like with War. I don't know if you played this as a kid. But yeah, so like it's like, okay, I've got four kings and like two aces or something, like playing them in a row. And then all of a sudden, ace, 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 ace. He can't have any more. Ace, ace, ace. Oh my god, what is happening? That's a long game of War if you have two decks. Holy cow. I don't know if I'd have the patience, because it used to just be me and my little brother playing War together in like the backseat of a car on a road trip. So it's just
Yeah.
two 8-year-olds sitting there.
Have you ever heard of the game Volcano Island?
No, but I don't know why it sounds familiar. Maybe because in pop culture it's a around.
So I believe it was an 80s board game and it was recently remade. You had like this board and you had this like tiki idol thing and you could turn it. And as you go across the board, you would take like these marbles and you drop them into the like tiki thing, and they roll down.
Ah,
If they knock your character off, you like lose where you are and such like that.
okay.
And semi recently they remade it again, another Kickstarter I backed, and it's really fun. And they actually made expansions for it, so they added things. The biggest one they added was like a shipwreck thing, and it's really cool because you have like this ship sticking out. I wish I could show it on the podcast, and at least I'll be able to show you a picture. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
put a link
yeah.
in the description. But like
There it
you have
is.
this big plastic board, you have like this ship, and like in the mast are cannonballs that like can roll down and knock people over.
Oh.
There's like the bees expansion, and you get like this little cup full of like yellow marbles, and it's like way more than all the lava balls you'd get. Because like the idea is like you can turn the head depending. I don't know how much control the players have over it, but you can turn the head, and then like depending on how long the game's been going, you put more and more marbles in, and it can randomly go down one of three paths.
Ah.
So you don't know who it's gonna hit, if anybody.
So this sounds like the type of game that like I would see at a store and I'm like, "Oh, my kids would like this." And then they're like, "Dad, can we play this game?" And I have to set up so much just for them to be bored while I'm setting it up.
It's once you have there's like a little bit of assembly, like there's like this cool little helicopter thing you build out of cardboard and stuff, but it actually is not that much assembly.
All right.
But like it's one of those games where I honestly think it'd be one of those things where like, oh, my kids will love this. You set it up and you're the one who falls in love with it.
All right,
Like
well then
it's
maybe we'll
actually got
check it out.
it's got a bit of strategy to it. It's got like the idea is you go around and you want to collect like as much treasure as possible. You get like little action cards to like help give you advantage and other people disadvantage. It's a fun
Um
game. I haven't played it in a while.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds lot more interesting because in my head, I'm thinking of like all of these other ones that have. That's an idea for a podcast. All the physical aspects of different tabletop games. So I'm just thinking of Mousetrap right now. You ever play this game?
Mousetrap. I would usually set it up for like just to play with the rude
Yeah,
toy
right.
machine.
I
I
know,
have no
right?
clue how the game actually worked.
I can't remember either, but I imagine like you just keep setting it up as you go. But yeah, that was it. We always lost the marbles.
A slight correction: it's called Fireball Island.
Oh, Fireball Island. No, I still haven't heard of it.
Well, yeah, but I need to make the correct. If I make the correction now, it'll make my future Joe's job easier. He doesn't have to come in.
Nice. We don't have to pay him more.
Exactly.
He's got a high fee.
Yes, he requests to stay alive.
All right, so more expansions.
There are no more. We've covered them all.
We've covered them all.
No,
So
actually, one thing I was thinking of that was interesting, and it's again something I haven't played, but it's still just in concept. It was on a podcast I heard about, this guy. What he did as a kid is when he was at his friend's house, is they had two different Monopoly board games, and they would set them up so like the home corners cover each other, and when you play double Monopoly. So when you get to the home, you can either go around that same board or you can switch over to the other board.
oh, like
Or
a
not
figure
home,
eight
go.
almost.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder how that plays because I wonder if you owned a bunch. So maybe like that middle row would be the hazard row because maybe you could own so much on one side, and it's like the strategy would be, hey, I'm gonna just keep going around this circle because it's way safer.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, like I said, I hate Monopoly, so I can't I've never tried it,
Nor will I ever play that
nor
bastard
will
game
I
with two
ever.
boards.
Nor will I ever, but it was still an interesting concept to be like, oh, look, you now have double the properties. And like, I think it almost kind of adds a little bit more strategy to the game because, like, you get, Monopoly is a game where it kind of starts out with strategically, like how you spend your money, but then it just kind of gets to a grind fest. But to
Yeah,
have,
who's
like,
got
when you actually have a choice of which way to go.
so there's a card game that I feel like we've talked about, but I'm struggling to think of what it is right now. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons style card game.
Munchkin?
Uh, Munchkin, that's right. And so there's so many expansions to Munchkin. Like anytime I'm at the bookstore, I'll see more expansions, and I don't know if they all go together though. But even recently, I saw like a Rick and Morty expansion for it, like where they had like all kinds of different Rick and Morty themed characters for it. And and so that game is a lot of fun. I don't have any. I just have the base version of it, but I really enjoyed that because it's helped me kind of teach my kids what like the different classes and races are for Dungeons and Dragons. So when I, can start DMing for them. But yeah, no, that's one game that I like a lot that has so many expansions. I guess another one would be like any of those card-based games, like Magic the Gathering or
Yeah.
others. They're always coming out with more.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the thing, right? Is there's like what I'm thinking of the two big ones are Magic the Gathering and then like Pokemon. And the
Yeah,
thing is, Pokemon, I could be very wrong with this, but I'm pretty sure like the cards that first came out are still legal in, with the new cards that come out. Meanwhile, Magic the Gathering like constantly keeps updating and changing. So like cards from like the first. There's probably a bunch of cards from the first generation that are fully banned.
Really? What makes
I
them
know.
banned?
I definitely know cards get banned over time, like in professional Magic the Gathering games.
Oh wow, that's gotta suck up. That's like your main card.
Yeah, probably does.
You can't use this
Actually,
minion.
talking about Magic the Gathering, this is actually a good time to move into our tabletop news.
All right.
So, not really recently because it's been a while since we recorded, but it still technically is relevant because there isn't new information. Wizards of the Coast announced that's right, two new books, which also fits with our theme because D&D's expansions, which we'll get into later. I should have looked up the titles of this so I could sound professional. So the two new books that are coming out are The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is coming out in September, and then they are also releasing Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos, which is supposed to come out in November. And Strixhaven, I believe, is another Magic the Gathering crossover book.
Oh wow. So what are each one of these include, or what are they doing? Because I know
So
there's not a whole lot of information about them yet.
there's not a whole lot of information. All I know is the one is going to be focusing on an adventure in the Feywild, which is really cool. It's something that's always kind of like been part of D&D. Like they've released a lot of subclasses that are connected to the Feywild, but they don't. Besides like the main book, like I think it's the Dungeon Master's Guide, they haven't really expanded on the Feywild, so it'll be really cool to have some new information there. And I'm
No.
assuming like those Fey creatures in not the most recent Unearthed Arcana, but the last one that we talked about, like with the rabbit and owl folk and stuff, I'm sure that'll show up again.
And so these are campaigns that people can play, or these
I think there's settings. So settings usually aren't like they don't have like a predetermined story in there, but it's like here's like as much lore building as we can give you in a book, plus some new class options,
Oh wow, okay.
which I absolutely love. Even though I rarely get to be a player, I love reading up on all the new classes and figuring out how to make ridiculous builds. And College of Strixhaven, as far as I can tell, is just more mage stuff. I believe Magic the Gathering had a Strixhaven expansion, so I think this is a Magic the Gathering book covering creatures and spells and stuff that they brought up in there. And this is a big news section because the most recent Unearthed Arcana is Strixhaven Mages, which is a bunch of subclasses.
And what do they do? The mages.
So that's what I wanted to talk about is not so much, I mean, I'll talk about a couple of the subclasses in a moment, but the most interesting thing to me is that every single subclass they have says it is listed to work for at least two different classes.
Oh.
So there's one that works for druids and warlocks. There's one that works for sorcerers and wizards. There's one that works for bard sorcerers and wizards. I don't remember which ones go to which exactly. I just know it's actually really crazy to have a subclass that works for different classes.
Right, right. Because I've never even heard of anything like this. Because you'd be like, "Oh, I'm a wizard," and then someone else is like, "I'm a warlock." It's like, yeah, we're both this other thing, though.
Yeah. So the ones I can remember off the top of my head, the subclasses, the first one was nothing really interesting. It was like something lore or whatever. And so my overall opinion, I don't want to go too deep dive because if you really want to figure this stuff out, it's free on the internet. You could figure it out. But I believe this series of subclasses is supposed to fill out those archetypes or archetypes. I don't know what the word is. Those niches that people have been asking for from classes for a long time are now being implemented. So this lore one, I can't even find the name. I'm not even going to bother. Is the main thing is you get like a combat buddy, which I'm thinking is kind of like the idea of having like a mage and then they have like a golem servant. I think that's like the
Oh.
idea they're going for. That's like a type of thing. I mean, technically artificers had that, but I think, having but an artificer is really not a full caster. They do a lot of magic, but they're not a full caster. A wizard is. They have a silver quill or silver tongue one, which is kind of like, while I know for a fact bard is one of the subclasses or one of the main classes for this subclass. It's kind of like I think it was like wizard and sorcerer could also take this. So it's really taking a bard and putting it into a different class. which I think is cool because they've done that with a couple other classes, and that one is using words and such to damage and heal and so on and so forth. The two that really piqued my interest is one is actually like a mathematician. The idea of like
All right.
mathematics and physics going with magic. That's like a niche that's been around for a very long time. It's, you see a lot of actual play podcasts have characters be like this. So it's really cool to see an actual subclass that reflects that. And then the really big one, the one I also really liked is I don't have the names in front of me. Didn't really want to look them up because I'm lazy. This one goes with druids and warlocks. Is basically you could be a witch finally.
Oh,
So
nice.
you have so like your earliest option, and I say earliest because like depending on what class you take depends on what levels you get these subclasses. It's all spelled out for in the PDF. Like the first one is like you can do some healing or you can do some necrotic damage, and then at a later level you can actually make like a brew, like you put like a cauldron, you have to have like a cauldron and an herbalism kit, and you can make like an actual like witch's brew. And it's just really cool because like I feel like witch is one of those things that people have been asking for a long time. Like I've basically it's like one of those things where it's like, how do I play a witch? Like it's possible. It's like
Yeah.
you can kind of be a druid, but like that's not really it. And then like being a wizard's like too smart. But to finally have like this subclass where it's specifically like you can either be like a good witch and do the healing, you could do the necrotic cursing stuff, you can like make this brew that does different things. That was really cool to see.
Well, I can finally, play out my fantasy of being, at Hogwarts. So that would be something I can do. I'm only joking. But no, witches seem like super powerful beings that I feel like aren't in the D&D world, and now they're, because I think that there's like enemies though that are witches, right?
There are hags, which are like real evil witches, basically.
Yeah, I used to date one.
So moving on to D&D, this is where things are going to get interesting because normally what happens is me and Mike go back and forth about D&D stuff, and then Julian pipes in with fun questions. But
Oh
Mike's not
man,
here, so Julian, you got to pick up the slack and do two jobs.
I'm gonna call him up and wake him up there wherever he is right now. I don't. He would be
It
selling.
is
He's like, I have
3
to
a.m.
work.
So yeah, but D&D has a whole lot of expansions. I mean, I can't show it on camera or on a podcast because it's an audio format, but I have so many books and I don't even own all of them.
Right.
And they all add so much to it, either world building or new classes, new items, new spells. My most favorite ones, I figured this is a good place to start,
Yeah.
is Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, because these both add not only these are really good rounded, like we're adding elements for everyone, kind of everything. It's new subclasses, new spells, new items, new tables, new ways to like build out lore and set up things for stories and adventures. And it's incredible how you see these things and you're like, wow, like this was stuff they thought of after they've already come out with such a great game.
Yeah, I think that me coming in to D&D when I came in, there was quite a bit of expansions already open or available. And I know that I just had like the player's handbook at first, and I'd go through there and I would bring up a question to you like, "Hey man, what do you think about this?" And you're like, "Oh, if this is where your head's going, I've got a book for you." And then you'd send me down to one of these two books, and I'm like, holy cow, dude, there's like way more than I even was thinking. Like I can't give any examples right off the bat, but like even with spells, like I would say, hey, this is how my character is. Like, is there like a spell that does this? And there it might be a spell that was in a new book, because I know for clerics it really added in a lot more spells. And I want to say Xanathar's Guide to Everything, which,
That's
by
what
the
that
way,
that came out like right when we started playing, actually.
oh, is that right? Yeah, okay, so that
Yeah.
makes sense why you were like telling me all that stuff, because then I ended up having that book. Which, who is Xanathar? He's got to be some high priestess or something.
Oh, this is gonna shock your system.
Oh,
So
good.
Xanathar is a crime lord who is also a beholder.
No. So
Yes.
that's why the front of the book looks like that.
Yeah, and he has
Oh.
a pet goldfish, which is like his most treasured possession, which is
Oh
why the
wow.
goldfish is on the book.
Yeah. Cuz it's like the beholders like swarming around it, right?
Yeah,
All right, that's pretty interesting.
but he's supposed to be like a crime lord, and he's like a massive hoarder and everything, and kind of gets around and gets a lot of information. That's kind of where everything. That's why it's his guide to everything.
Right. And then what is the other one that we were just talking about?
Tasha's cauldron of everything.
So I know that there's even a spell for Tasha's hideous laughter.
That is
Is this
correct.
nice? All right, look at this dude. Mike's in my spirit right now. He's like,
Yep.
dude, how did you not know this already? All right, so who is she in these
So
expansions? Why is
Tasha's
she important?
I don't know as much about Tasha, but the thing is, so there's a lot of spells that have a wizard or sorcerer or whoever created. Technically, it's like the lore of who created it. I believe Mordenkainen is the magnificent. I think like the Magnificent Mansion spell is Mordenkainen's, and he has a whole book called the Tome of Foes. So the idea is kind of like I think what they're trying to go for is like this fun idea of like, oh yeah, there's like this great wizard known as Mordenkainen. Here's the book he published, you know,
Ah,
and
okay.
here, and Tasha's like, a powerful wizard as well. And it's like, here's the book she published. I think that's like kind of what they're going for is like the powerful names that we already know about releasing information.
Wow. Okay, so that makes it a lot more fun. Cause I love the name Xanthar's Guide to Everything. I'm like, oh man, like it always made me wonder who is this guy? Because I don't play a lot of preset campaigns. Normally they're
Same.
yeah. So, but I'd always like to, at the very least, like read the books on them because there's so much backstory in all those expansions that they bring up. Because just the base game, I mean, like if you took one book from D&D, like anything, do they stack? Because I know that you can go from book to book in some fashion.
We technically talked about this in an earlier episode with the news. In Adventurers League, the original ruling for making a character was the PHB plus one, meaning you can have anything, you can make a character with anything in the player's handbook plus one other source book. They've recently gotten rid of that ruling. So now you can, so like, for example, this is strictly taken from an XP to level 3 video, but like originally you couldn't have a sea elf swashbuckler rogue, and so like you had to compromise. You'd be like, okay, I'll just be an assassin rogue, or I won't be a sea elf, sort of thing.
Ah, yeah.
Because the sea elf comes from Volo's Guide to Monsters. Maybe it's in other books, but it's definitely in that one at least. And then the swashbuckler rogue is from Xanathar's Guide. So I think the original idea for that was like, we've built this book, like we built these extra races to work with the player's handbook. We've built these extra classes to work with the
Mm,
player's handbook. So it's quite possible that, the race in this book might like be broken with a class in this
right.
book for whatever reason. I think they eventually realized that's really stupid because they've never made anything like it. There's no race as far as as maybe someone can prove me wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, there's no broken race in
Yeah.
D&D. The most imbalanced thing is the fact that you can play that variant humans are the only ones to get a feat.
I know. I love that. That's incredible. Is that part of the player's handbook or is that part of
Yes,
another experience? Okay.
that's part of the player's handbook. And then Tasha's actually recently, with Tasha's coming out, they released I think it's just called Variant Race. And you can now, I believe you get 2 points. You can put either both into one thing or two separately, and then you get a feat, which people like to use because it's like I can create anything I want and still have it be pretty, and get a feat and not have to be subjected to these base rules.
Yeah, getting that feat is pretty remarkable in some aspects. I know that one of the characters I just built recently, I started at level 5, so he was already getting that ability modifier. I just took 2 feats, and those 2 feats just made me freaking awesome. You know, you do not get, but even with the feats, they give you an ability modifier a lot of times too.
Yeah, I think about half of them do. I
Yeah,
mean,
so you're not
I
completely
could
out of
be
luck.
very off of that ratio, but yeah, I think about half of them give you a plus one in something. And I mean, they're making new feats all the time, coming out with new stuff. You know, Tasha's added a bunch of cool stuff. I'm still gasp on about Tasha's. It's probably, I won't lie. I think Xanathar's Guide I was excited for because I was like, that was like a purchase I made like right after we started our campaign, like my first,
Yeah,
our first real group that we did.
right.
But like Tasha's added such cool things, like that they added like new meta magic options for sorcerers. They added like new fighting styles. Like we now have the unarmed fighting style for fighters, which people have been begging for since day one. You always are like, why are monks the only ones who can punch? Like, why can't I be a barbarian who punches? Why can't I be a
Right.
fighter who punches? And now
Yeah,
they've made it
boxer.
a very viable option with the pugilist fighting style. And then all the new spells. They have the wild magic barbarian. Anything wild magic gets my fancy.
Wild magic barbarian seems pretty bizarre because I mean, isn't a barbarian all about brute strength? And now we're talking about throwing in some random magic now.
Yeah, the idea is you're supposed to like channel your rage from the Feywild. Again, this is kind of another thing that's interesting about the new Feywild expansion coming out because it's such like an integral part. They keep bringing it up with different classes and races and so on and so forth. Heck, I think like most of the Magic the Gathering books that came out, they had like centaurs, minotaurs, satyrs, and they all have like Fey ancestry. And it's like
Oh
we
wow.
have so little information really about this world.
Well, it's
God, I I need a life.
or you need to read up more on these things so that you can give that knowledge to us and the listeners.
God, I absorb it. I find it so weird. This is just going off on a personal tangent, but I find it so weird that it's like once I started getting real, once I really dove into D&D, how that's like what my brain is like. This is it. This is you.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
absorbing this information, sir.
You're like a sponge. It's like someone can give you like a grocery list, but you're like, oh no, but I got all these spells backed in here. No, I think it's good though because especially when you DM, and I've said this a million times, but because me, I don't know all this stuff, so I'm like, hey, what does this mean? You're like, boom, 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 boom. Look at these books, and so having that like Rolodex in your brain constantly is pretty convenient.
It helps too because like when I play, not only like when I have one new player such as you show up, and I'd be like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, let me just give you a friendly reminder about your abilities so you can
right.
make the best choice. When I'm playing in my Barwalk group, it's like Jeff comes in. Jeff recently in our story, his dwarf barbarian got banished to another plane. So I was like, please bring it. Can you bring in another character till we get him back? Because, I'm not taking him away from you, but I think it'd be better for the story and for you to have someone to cover for like the next 3 or 4 sessions. And so he brought in a fighter because Jeff really likes fight. Listen, he likes to play a human fighter, which is a real basic bitch move. And it's like fighters can be good. You just need to be. It comes down to the role playing, really. But it's like I fully respect it because he comes in with this fighter, and I gave him the simplest outline because the character he showed up with didn't even have a subclass, and it was a level like 12 character. But like a champion fighter with great weapon master, it's like I'm like, you get 3 attacks, you have an action surge, you have second wind, and if you roll a 1 or a 2 on your damage die, you could re-roll that to try and get higher. Like, it's fun. I can get that. Like, you are going to be a damage machine, but I also really wish you picked a different race at least because there is like over 70 races and human can get boring.
Yeah, the only campaign it seems like humans aren't so boring is that America campaign.
Yeah. And I mean, humans aren't boring in general. As long as you have a diverse group, it's almost kind of more fun to have like one human and like the really like odd races that aren't around.
Yeah,
Like, guys, I stand out even though I'm like normally used to being fitting into everything.
right. That is one thing that I like about the expansions of D&D is the because the player handbook has like all those traditional fantasy races like dwarf, elf, orc, human. I think they even
Halfling.
halflings. Yeah, like so everyone knows about those. But then you get some of these expansions, and all of a sudden you have like the birds, the lizard people, dragon people, turtle people, just tabaxis. Like you have all these new things that maybe you've heard of but don't know how to explore. And I love those aspects of the expanded D&D books.
Yeah, it's amazing. We could go on about this forever. And I mean, we really tried to keep it to what's really incredible when you think about it is we really kept it to just D&D official materials. The one thing I love about 5e is how moddable it is. And that's why there are people like the action fiction who have the Murica things, and there's a bunch of other things where it's like it's so easy to make new things and add on to it. I can respect 3.5 where it's like you can have some really fun shit where you can get like modifiers upon modifiers, so you can get like stack things up to like having like a plus 20 to some sort of random skill check. But like 5e is so easy to just pick up and play and change and mod and homebrew and make it what you want. It's incredible. I highly recommend everyone should try to play at least one game of D&D to like see what it's about.
It should be a requirement for American high schools. You have a whole semester of D&D. It's gonna be on the proficiency test.
All right, I think that's been long enough. We've been going for an hour, and I'm sure it'll get cut down to way less.
It's a 10-minute podcast.
So, Don Julian, do you have anything you want to plug?
I do this week. I had to plug in my computer to a pretty bizarre outlet. I did not have to do it. We would have recorded this at a probably a more appropriate time. But yeah, I had to go buy one of those universal plugs. So that's it this week, but I will be working on more additional plugs. Not necessarily electrical, but yeah, that's it.
So he hasn't been streaming as much recently, but occasionally you can go and find him out. Check out Mike's channel on Twitch, mboron0219. I haven't been in the streams recently because I am working my butt off in a garage on Friday nights now, and it's very hard for me to stop and watch a stream. You can tweet at me at DM Joe Thunder. You can email the show, thetabletopteampodcast@gmail.com. Please send in your comments, questions, or suggestions because, good Lord, we need them. We occasionally, very rarely, we're trying to do it because my sister and I moved into a new place, so we have our own internet and things are a little bit easier. We're going to try to get the streaming back on, so that's twitch.tv/thetabletopteam. And finally, I believe I'm going to have the one-shot, The West is Wild Part 2 released before this episode, because that's really easy to edit. But if you guys really like that kind of one-shot, like really loose vibe, I'm going to try to record the audio better next time. But if people really like that, I'd love to do more things like that and post that on the off weeks from the regular scheduled programming. That's all from me. You got anything else you want to say?
I got nothing.
Cool. Well, how do I end? Welcome to the Tabletop Team. Welcome to the Tabletop Team. That's how you end the podcast. You say welcome.